our segment, Election Hacking, Facebook says it suspended more than 100 Facebook and Instagram accounts hours before yesterday's midterm elections. In a statement, the company said, quote, "Our very early stage investigation has so far identified around 30 Facebook accounts and 85 Instagram accounts that may be engaged in coordinated inauthentic behavior."
Facebook says it has concerns those accounts could be linked to the same Russian internet research agency that spread disinformation during the 2016 presidential election.
All right, for more on this, we're joined by CNET senior producer Dan Patterson. Okay, so Dan, what can you tell us about these suspended accounts?
Yeah, so the report came out last Sunday, or Facebook said they were contacted by federal agencies last Sunday. The report came out just before the election, and it looks like when they say coordinated inauthentic behavior, this is a euphemism for what we've called influence campaign content. That the IRA was involved or is allegedly involved is no real surprise. These accounts are behaving in a way that is pretty reminiscent of what we saw in 2016, but the scale is much smaller, or at least at this point is much smaller. So we were watching this all night last night as returns came in. We kept our eye on what was happening on various social networks. And although there is a large amount of bot and troll activity, and some of this, like Facebook said, could be linked back to the IRA, really, when we look at the types of content and we look at the influence of this content, it was simply not as big as 2016 to this point. Now let's wait a few weeks. We'll kind of do some after-action analysis and figure out, just like in 2016, where Zuckerberg and Facebook kind of laughed and joked about the ability for foreign governments to influence the content on their accounts. Then came the reports later. So we may see interesting things pop up over the next couple weeks and months.
So there are a couple outstanding races. What are you looking for as final results come in?
So we're looking at a couple things. Nevada has been pretty interesting. There were reports of power going out in a couple voting districts, but I want to, before we freak out about potential attacks on critical infrastructure, we do know that the Russians were able to engage with the U.S. power grid, and we talked about this during the election hacking system. We don't want to attribute this to that. It's simply something that we are monitoring. We're also looking at, well, once again, social media content. Facebook said before the election that not just with these influence campaign contents related to the election, that they had also admitted to some culpability regarding some hate content that resulted in the death of different groups of people who have been marginalized around the world. So we do know that social media has the power to radicalize. And I think that that's kind of what we're looking at, is how deep and how influential social networks actually are when it comes to radicalization. There are a few other things that happened during the election that we kind of want to monitor, but none of this was, once again, at the scale of 2016. And accounts of hacking, as the DHS said yesterday, are simply not coordinated in any way that makes us feel as though foreign governments are really, or played a big role last night.
Yeah, I think some people might be watching the news and hear reports of, odd things happening with voting machines, whether it's the humidity in one state, or people have complained of seeing their votes flip back to another candidate. But all of this has, at this point, nothing to do with hacking, as far as we know. So should people be concerned about their vote?
No. Look, this is something that we said over and over again during the election hacking segment and in the run-up to the election. And we did speak with many dozens of people in our reporting. Over a dozen came on air and were willing to sit down in our studio. These are people who work at some of the world's largest technology firms. They work in election commissions. They work in different forms of cybersecurity and law enforcement. And every single one of those people said, I have full confidence my vote will be counted, and Americans should feel the same level of confidence.
There you go.
All right, Dan, thanks, man.
Good to see you.